It was their 20th wedding anniversary, and David had gone to great lengths to make the evening unforgettable. He chose a quaint restaurant on a quiet street, where warm light spilled through lace curtains onto the cobblestones. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of rosemary and garlic, and the soft murmur of conversations mingled with the clink of silverware. Candlelight danced on the linen tablecloths, casting a golden glow over the small space. David had reserved a corner table, their favorite spot, where they could sit close and reminisce about the years they'd shared. The laughter, the tears, the quiet moments that had woven their lives together. As they settled in, David raised his glass, his eyes shining with the warmth of 20 years of love. But Catherine, his wife, his partner, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, seemed distant. Her fingers fidgeted nervously with the edge of her napkin, twisting it into tight knots, and her gaze wandered around the room, avoiding his. There was a tension in her shoulders, a tightness in her jaw, as if she were bracing herself for something. David's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of concern as he asked if she was all right. She nodded, but the gesture was too quick, too forced, and it did nothing to ease his worry. Then, without warning, she began to speak, her voice low and trembling. The words tumbled out like a long-suppressed confession, each one landing like a stone in David's stomach. 18 years ago, she said, right after their wedding, she had been a resident at County General Hospital. One night, during a late shift, she had accidentally walked into the wrong room and stumbled upon a scene that had haunted her ever since. The hospital administrator, a man she had once respected, stood over the body of a patient who had been declared dead hours earlier. But the body was not at rest. It was being dissected, organs carefully removed and packed into coolers by two strangers in surgical masks. This was no official procedure, it was a black market operation, a brutal harvest for profit. Catherine had frozen, her breath catching in her throat as the administrator's eyes met hers. He smiled, a cold, predatory smile, and told her to forget what she'd seen, to walk away and never speak of it. But she couldn't. The next day, trembling with fear and outrage, she reported the incident to the hospital's ethics board. She expected swift action, perhaps even gratitude for exposing such a horrific crime. Instead, she was met with silence and then threats. Her car's brakes failed on a rain-slicked highway, and she narrowly avoided a fatal crash. She emerged unscathed, but the warning was clear. Days later, their apartment was broken into while she was at work. Nothing was stolen, but a note was left on the kitchen table. Stop digging or disappear. Terrified, she turned to the FBI. They confirmed her worst fears. She had stumbled upon a ruthless organ trafficking ring with deep ties to the medical community. They offered her a way out, witness protection, a new identity, a chance to start over. But there was a catch. She would have to leave everything behind, including David. The thought of abandoning him, of walking away from the life they were building, was unbearable. So she refused. Instead, she made a choice that would define the next 2 decades. She legally changed her name to Catherine Mills, claiming it was a fresh start after medical school. She buried her past, locked it away in the darkest corners of her mind, and prayed it would never resurface. For 15 years, it worked. The threats stopped, the administrator died under mysterious circumstances, and the case faded from memory. They had children, twin daughters Emma and Sophia, now 17 and on the cusp of adulthood. They built a home, careers, a life that seemed unshakable. But last week, the past clawed its way back. A plain envelope arrived in the mail, containing a photograph of Emma and Sophia walking home from school. On the back, scrawled in jagged letters, were the words, "Still watching." Recent news of organ trafficking rings being busted had likely stirred up old enemies, and now their family was once again in the crosshairs. David sat stunned as Catherine's words washed over him. The woman he had loved for 2 decades, the mother of his children, was not who he thought she was. Her name, her history, the very foundation of their life together, it had all been built on a lie. Shock gave way to a storm of emotions. Betrayal, anger, confusion. But beneath it all was a deep, abiding love. He looked at her, truly looked and saw the fear in her eyes, the guilt that had gnawed at her for years. She had kept this secret to protect him, to protect their family, but now the truth was out, and there was no going back. The night stretched on, the cozy restaurant now feeling stifling. David and Catherine returned home in silence, the weight of her confession hanging between them like a chasm. In the living room, the familiar space suddenly felt alien. The photos on the walls, smiling faces, family vacations, milestones, seemed like relics from another life. David paced, his mind racing, while Catherine sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. They needed to make a decision, and quickly. The FBI had made it clear. The threat was real, and time was short. Witness protection was their best option, but the cost was steep. They would have to leave everything behind. Their home, their careers, their friends, the girls' school. They would be given new identities, relocated to a new city, and forced to start over from scratch. It was a terrifying prospect, but the alternative was unthinkable. The photograph of their daughters was a stark reminder that their family was in danger, and inaction was not an option. The next morning, they gathered Emma and Sophia in the living room. The girls, sensing the tension, exchanged worried glances. Catherine took a deep breath and began to explain, her voice steady but laced with sorrow. She told them about her true identity, about the incident at the hospital, about the threats that had forced her to live a lie. She spoke of the recent photograph, of the danger that now loomed over them. The girls listened, their faces paling, their eyes widening in disbelief. Sophia reacted first. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she struggled to process what she was hearing. She felt betrayed, as if the mother she had known all her life was a stranger. Emma, ever the pragmatist, asked pointed questions. How long had Mom known? Why hadn't she told them sooner? What would happen to their friends, their college plans? Catherine answered as best she could, her heart breaking with each word. She assured them that her love was real, that their family was real, but the truth of her past could no longer be hidden. David stepped in, his voice calm but firm. He explained the FBI's offer, witness protection for the entire family. It would mean leaving everything behind, starting fresh in a new place with new names. It was a lot to ask, especially of two teenagers on the brink of adulthood. But the alternative, living in fear, constantly looking over their shoulders, waiting for the next threat, was unbearable. After a long, tear-filled discussion, the family came to a decision. They would accept the FBI's offer and enter witness protection together. The following days were a blur of activity. They packed their lives into boxes, each item a reminder of the life they were leaving behind. They said goodbye to their home, to the memories etched into its walls, to the community they had been a part of for so long. The girls withdrew from school, offering vague explanations to their friends about a sudden move. It was a painful process, but a necessary one. As they drove away from their old life, the road stretched out before them, and David reached for Catherine's hand. They were in this together, for better or worse, and they would face whatever came next as a family. Their new home was a modest house on the outskirts of a small town, far from the bustling city they had known. The air was cleaner here, the pace slower, but the sense of displacement was palpable. They were no longer David, Catherine, Emma, and Sophia. They were now Michael, Sarah, Lily, and Rose Johnson. The names felt foreign, like borrowed masks that didn't quite fit. The house, though cozy with its creaky floors and sunny windows, was not their home. It was a refuge, a hiding place, but it lacked the warmth of familiarity. Sarah, once Catherine, once Jennifer, threw herself into making the house a home. She hung curtains, arranged furniture, filled the kitchen with the scent of freshly baked bread. But no amount of effort could dispel the cloud of unease that hung over them. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the yard, made her jump. She had brought this upon her family, and the guilt was a constant companion. She watched her daughters, now Lily and Rose, adapt to their new lives with a resilience that both amazed and humbled her. They were 17, on the cusp of adulthood, but there was a weariness in their eyes that no teenager should know. Michael, her husband, threw himself into his work. He had taken a job at a local law firm, a far cry from the high-profile cases he once handled. The work was mundane, but it provided structure, a semblance of normalcy in a world turned upside down. Yet at night, when the house was quiet, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The betrayal still stung, a wound that refused to heal. He loved Sarah. He always would, but the secret had left a scar, one that throbbed in the silence. He wondered if he could ever truly trust her again, if their marriage could withstand the weight of her past. The girls enrolled in the local high school, a small institution where everyone knew everyone. Lily, the more outgoing of the two, joined the debate team, her sharp mind a perfect fit for the verbal sparring. Rose, quieter and more introspective, found solace in the art club, where she could lose herself in color and form. But both were careful, always mindful of the secrets they carried. They caught themselves mid-sentence, nearly mentioning a favorite cafe from their old town or a family tradition they could no longer celebrate. Friendships were tentative, built on half-truths, and trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. Sarah took a job at a community clinic, her medical skills still sharp despite the years. The clinic was understaffed and overworked, but helping others gave her a sense of purpose. It was a balm for the guilt that gnawed at her, a way to atone for the chaos she had wrought. Michael sensed her turmoil and tried to reassure her. He reminded her that they were together, that their love was real, and that they would weather this storm as they had others. But his words often felt hollow, even to him. The adjustment was far from smooth. There were arguments, sharp, tear-filled clashes born of fear and frustration. The family attended therapy sessions, learning to navigate their new reality. Slowly, they began to find a rhythm. They celebrated small victories, a good grade, a new friend, a successful day at work. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then fuller, richer. They learned to find joy in the mundane. A shared meal, a walk in the park, a movie night. Through it all, their bond deepened, forged in the crucible of shared adversity. They were not the same people they had been, but they were still a family. And in that, there was hope. 6 months in, their fragile peace shattered. It began with a series of small things. A car parked too long outside the house. A stranger asking too many questions at the clinic. A feeling of being watched. Sarah tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a remnant of their traumatic history, but the feeling grew with each passing day. Then, one evening, as she was locking up the clinic, a note appeared under the door. A single sheet of paper, neatly folded, with 3 words scrawled in black ink. "We found you." Panic seized her. She raced home, her hands shaking as she showed the note to Michael. His face hardened, the old fears rushing back with a vengeance. They contacted their FBI handler, who assured them they were safe, that the note was likely a prank or a mistake. But Sarah knew better. The handwriting was familiar, the tone unmistakable. It was a message from the past, a reminder that their enemies had not forgotten. The family gathered in the living room, the note lying on the coffee table like a ticking time bomb. Lily and Rose, now accustomed to their new names, looked to their parents for answers. Sarah explained the situation, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her fear. They had 2 choices: stay and hope it was a false alarm, or flee again, start over in yet another town. But the thought of uprooting their lives once more was unbearable. They had just begun to settle, to build something resembling normalcy. Staying meant fighting. Leaving meant admitting defeat. Michael, ever the protector, argued for staying and fighting. They could increase security, alert the locals, be vigilant. But Sarah hesitated. She knew what these people were capable of, how far they would go to silence her. The safety of her family was paramount, and she couldn't bear the thought of them being in danger again. The girls were divided as well. Lily, with her fiery spirit, wanted to stand their ground, while Rose, more cautious, feared the unknown. As the discussion wore on, tensions rose. Old wounds reopened, and the trust they had so carefully rebuilt began to fray. Michael accused Sarah of bringing this upon them, of failing to shield them from her past. Sarah snapped back, reminding him of the sacrifices she had made, the years she had lived in fear to protect them. The girls, caught in the crossfire, retreated to their rooms, their faith in their parents shaken. The following days were tense, the family walking on eggshells, the specter of danger looming over them like a storm cloud. Sarah and Michael barely spoke, their interactions reduced to curt exchanges. The girls withdrew, their once strong bond strained by the uncertainty. It was a dark time, a test of their resilience and their love. But amid the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerged. Sarah, determined to protect her family, began digging into the past, using her medical contacts and resources to uncover the truth about the organ trafficking ring. She discovered that the ring had been dismantled years ago, its leaders imprisoned or dead. The note, she realized, was likely the work of a lone wolf, someone with a grudge but without the backing of a criminal network. Armed with this knowledge, she approached Michael, laying out her findings. He listened, his anger giving way to relief. Together, they devised a plan to confront the threat. They contacted the FBI, who agreed to provide additional security while they investigated the source of the note. It was a risk, but one they were willing to take. The investigation bore fruit. The note, it turned out, had been sent by a former member of the ring, recently released from prison and seeking revenge. He was acting alone, without the resources or support of his old associates. With the FBI's help, he was apprehended before he could carry out his threats. The danger, though real, was neutralized, and the family could breathe again. But the ordeal had left its mark. The family gathered once more in the living room, the tension of the past weeks dissipating like morning fog. Sarah and Michael sat side by side, their hands clasped, a silent acknowledgement of the trials they had overcome. Lily and Rose, their faces softened by the ordeal, joined them, their bond as sisters and daughters reaffirmed. They had faced the shadows of the past and emerged stronger, their love tempered in the crucible of adversity. There was still much uncertainty ahead, but they knew they would face it together. They had learned that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, that forgiveness was a choice, not a feeling, and that family was defined not by names or histories, but by the love that bound them. As they sat in the quiet of their home, the sun setting and casting long shadows across the floor, they felt a sense of peace. They were not the same people they had been, but they were still a family. And in that, there was hope.